want to have a conversation around being in your true power in relation to physical healing. Maybe just to create some context.
Before you go further, we just want to say, we'll be very brief, that almost contradicts itself. True power and something that needs to be healed. You get what we're getting at. So true power is knowing your wellness. Not true power is needing a healing.
Okay.
And they're different. They're so very different.
Okay, I'll start with this context then. At a cutting board, not paying attention, chopped off a little bit of my fingertip. In that moment, I determined that I was going to heal as fast as I could. And I was focusing a lot on things that made me feel good in the moment.
Now we're going to keep interrupting you just for fun, but we know you can hold your train of thought, so it's going to be a good conversation. Were you in your true power when you chopped off the end of your finger?
No, definitely not.
And did you suddenly just fall out of your true power when you chopped off the end of your finger, or were you sort of
working at it a bit?
You were sort of already on that place of not being in your true power.
Yes.
So after a manifestation, like chopping off the end of your finger or cutting yourself a little bit or whatever, are you more likely or less likely to then get into your true power? What do you think? It's a trick question, so be careful.
The contrast was so sharp that it made me go into my true power more, I would imagine.
Yes, because when you know what you don't want, you know what you do want. So it could go either way. Someone who understands how this all works and someone who understands the power of focus can have a contrasting experience which causes them to focus more sharply on on what it is they do want, and you can command the resources of the universe in that way. So there's no right or wrong answer because it's an individually different thing, isn't it?
Yes.
We agree with you. In your case, it did cause you to decide.
I think the conversation is commanding of those resources, but specifically focused on a physical event. When you talked about athletes, I could relate. I can understand there's an action that you're taking and you're attempting a physical action towards a goal. When you're focused on physical healing, there isn't a basketball that you dribble or something that you shoot. It's a little bit more intangible.
It seems so, but we want to make it feel the same to you, because the ability, let's say basketball, just because Esther's better at those analogies because she watches so much of it. When you are shooting toward the basket, there are known things like distance, angles, strength, muscles, agility, personal performance, mind-body control. And then when you put other people in the mix, agility, sensitivity, awarenesses, flexibility, we could have a long conversation about that. But we want to say known factors known by someone, known factors known by inner being. So the question when you're shooting the ball is, how much are you allowing you, shooter of the ball, to know about what your inner being knows? And the more in tune you are with your inner being, the more you'll be able to accomplish that, if you want to, every time. Every time. It's possible to do it every time because those factors are so knowable. Same with your body. Those factors are knowable. So the question is, what you were making a valid point about is, I seem to know more of those knowable factors when it comes to shooting a basketball than I do when I'm dealing with unseen things that are going on in my physical body. But it could be exactly the same.
So what does it feel like to allow a momentum so great that you could experience a rapid progression in your physical well-being from...
What's the emotional feel? You said, what does it feel like?
What would an experience like that feel like?
It feels like invincibility. It feels like clarity. It feels like satisfaction. It feels like certainty. It feels like security. It feels like knowing. It feels like fun, really fun. It feels like empowerment. It feels like self-assuredness. It feels like having it all going on. It feels like well-being. And it looks like arrogance, obnoxiousness, to others who are looking, it looks like lunacy.
Well, it's an interesting point. So my wife at the time had, after a couple of minutes, asked, how's it going? And I could feel from the basis of her question that the expectation of what had happened and my response should be a certain way. And I felt different because I just felt like I had to focus on something completely different that maybe other people weren't recognizing at the time. So maybe it did look a little bit like lunacy in the sense where I just wasn't responding in a way that I guess a normal person who cut their finger should. But I'm really curious.
We just want to stick this in here. No matter what the situation is, whether it's one as you've described or something less bloody or less seeming to require a quick response, in every situation, there is a path of lesser or greater resistance. Those are the choices. And when you are accustomed to tuning up with your inner being, we want to make this statement. We make it often. We want to make it all day, every day, until you accept it unequivocally. Your inner being knows where you stand on all subjects relative to what you want on all subjects, and knows in that gap between where you stand and what you want, if there is a gap, and there almost always is, knows what the path of least resistance is to close that gap. So your inner being has access to every cell in your body. Your inner being has access to every resource that your physical body has. And when you are expecting that, when you are at one with that, then you don't get in the way of the communication that your inner being is making with the cells of your body. Literally able to slow blood flow down, literally able to start the coagulation process in a faster way, literally able to give you the impulse to put your own temporary tourniquet, even if it is just by holding that finger with the other until you get to someplace else. All of the resources are there, and your inner being knows what the path of least resistance is to get you to the immediate results that you're looking for. We think this is an interesting discussion since we were talking about triage earlier. In other words, just doing something to stop the bleeding. There are a lot of things that you want to do to stop the bleeding, not because the bleeding needs to be stopped because you're going to bleed out, not for that, but because there is a path of less resistance and less resistance and less resistance and less resistance and less resistance. And we're not ever going to ask you to know what the final or best path is. Your inner being isn't ever going to ask you that either. Your inner being always knows. This is so important to know. Your inner being always knows what's the simplest way to get you to where you want to be, meaning your inner being knows what your bugaboos are and how to get you around them. And it's never helpful to have some panicked person in your life who has a whole set of other bugaboos that you're having to get around too.
Just for clarity, and so I don't get into trouble, my wife was not like that. She was...
But think about it. If you go to the doctor with whatever you've got, and the doctor says, hi, I've experienced this many times, we've got this, you'd feel one way. If the doctor goes, oh my God! You'd feel different.
Yeah, absolutely. How does your inner being communicate with cells? I had through a meditation...
Vibrationally.
Vibrationally.
It's a vibrational language.
And would it be one vibration in a group of cells? Like,
sometimes analogies are almost insulting because they're so simple, and yet they make a point that we really want to make. Have you ever seen a flock of birds who seem to be operating out of one mind? Even though they're individual beings, it's like they're all getting their sense of what to do next from something. You might ask the question, is there a leader in the mix? Well, maybe, but no. Is there a broader non-physical leader in the mix? Yes. And the intuitive, tuned in, tapped in, turned on birds are receiving that knowing, and then the birds are all responding in kind. And so the cells of your body are way more sophisticated and cooperative than a flock of birds. There are trillions of them, first of all. Talk about a flock. And each of them in concert with source all of them cooperative and willing and capable and able and ready. So when something happens which causes you to offer an intention and your inner being doesn't get involved, your inner being always is involved. Your inner being isn't on the ready, your inner being is involved. So your inner being begins right away offering, with all of that knowledge about who you are and what you want, begins offering vibrational intentions which the cells begin receiving and are only hindered by your thoughts that get in the way. And even then, there's not that much hindering that happens because the well-being is so strong. It takes really a lot of years of really not believing in healing. In other words, almost everybody expects when they cut themselves that it's going to heal up. And it's only the stuff you can't see. You're really good at broken bones and cuts and things. That's why you let them heal, because they're out there where you can see them. Look at that. It forms a scab almost immediately, and then a scar that makes it stronger still. Wow, what a good body I've got. I made a mistake and I made a hole in myself and it patched itself. It knows what to do. It's the things you can't see and the things that people tell you about the things that you can't see that makes you not trust in the healing process.
Second context, had a big fight with my brother. Next morning I go down, I'm thinking about it, go to reach for a pan, back, out. Just clear as day, the connection. Go back upstairs, meditate again. I felt 40% kind of reconnected. Hard time breathing, still uncomfortable for about a week and a half. All of a sudden I just get this brutal email from my brother and I just kind of skip through it. Go back to my car and I meditate 5 minutes and had a response of 3 lines. One that kind of acknowledged where he was at, one that acknowledged where I was at, and one where I'm intended to go. As soon as I sent it, like just kind of instant alignment, as it were. I felt that was in part, I guess, in practice of meditating and some preparation, but it just got me thinking too, are there other ways, and not like you're looking for contrast and wanting to fix it, according to our earlier conversation, but are there ways that we can get ahead of?
Yes.
Or what are the ways might be a better?
Endless ways that you'll be inspired to, but here's a premise that once you own this premise, then everything that you're asking about will fall easily into place. And this is the premise. I'm going to meditate and get into alignment because it feels good to me, not because once I do that, I will be able to influence my brother. If you leave the uncontrollable out of the equation, and you only talk to yourself about what is controllable, which is about your connection with your own inner being, which is what meditation brings you. So there's this continuity of past, present, and future that's happening with you all the time. And we're asking a lot of any of you to say to you, all right, right now, we want you to just look forward and never mind the continuity that you've been living. That really seems like lunacy, that you could stop remembering who you are. Even the cells of your body remember who they are, or you wouldn't have a scar. So there is a certain amount of remembering who you are. It's the continuity that is required, and it's the bouncing off place. But if the emphasis is on where you're going rather than where you've been, if the emphasis is on where you're going rather than where you are, now you have a leverage that is really something worth talking about. But it requires doing it because it feels good to me, not because if I'm connected, I'll be able to help my brother or influence my brother. Your motive has to be your connection, which does feel good. But you all freak out when we say you want to feel good. You freak out when we say you want to be connected. You'll go along with that. I'm willing to be connected as long as I don't feel too good, because I've been so mad at myself for so long. I don't think I'm really willing to give myself that break. Connection, which does feel good. But you all freak out when we say you want to feel good. You freak out when we say you want to be connected. You'll go along with that. I'm willing to be connected as long as I don't feel too good, because I've been so mad at myself for so long. I don't think I'm really willing to give myself that break.